Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. A little later, we're going to talk about homemade tanks in Granby. Don't worry, you're going to love it. But first, the woman who gets the pleasure of editing my column every week in the Denver Post, Megan Schrader. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, you took over for the late, great Chuck Plunkett.
I did.
Are you allowed corporately to say nice things about Chuck,
Yes.
or will you get fired if you say things about Chuck?
No, I can say nice things about Chuck. He was a wonderful editor. I miss him dearly.
But you got his gig.
I did get his gig.
All right, I'm going to put out a prediction. I predict that he will win a Pulitzer for the editorial spread he did, biting the hand that feeds the hedge fund that owns your life at the Denver Post.
I think that that's very possible. I think it's a strong contender. 100,000 people viewed that webpage.
How did he not get fired for that when a guy up in the Daily Camera did something similar, not even on his own pages, and got canned for it?
John, I was on maternity leave when all of that went down.
Wash your hands.
I'm not sure exactly what happened.
All right, so you walked back in to an editorial page that was, well, let's just say non-existent for a while, because everyone either quit or got laid off.
Yep.
And
I was the last remaining member of the Denver Post editorial board.
you have survivor's guilt?
Yeah, for sure.
Really?
Yep. Yep.
Say why?
Why do I have
Why?
survivor's guilt?
It's a cutthroat industry,
Because-
and you won. You're on top. You're on top of all the bloody bodies of other reporters.
Because I came back, and two of the most competent people I've worked with, Chuck and Cohen Pert, were gone, and I was there, and it was, so I have guilt, for
You have
sure.
guilt.
They were very, very good at their jobs.
Well, I don't see you quitting in protest. I don't see you resigning.
Oh, I'm not that guilty. I'm not that guilty.
All right, let's talk about the election that's coming up and your role as an editorialist. I've got to say that I think editorial pages don't have the same kick that they used to, especially with circulation down the way they are, that I imagine a Denver Post editorial is not as strong as it was a decade or two ago. Would you agree?
Yes, to a certain extent. Perhaps if you look at circulation numbers, you could make that argument. I'll tell you, we had no problem convincing candidates to spend time coming in to meet with our board.
Yeah, of course.
They treated our endorsements like they were significant. The public treats our endorsements like they're significant. We hear from them when they disagree with us. We hear from them when they agree with us. I think people out there care what an independent editorial board has to say about the election. That kind of independent voice, I feel like, is so few and far in between these days that people are looking forward to having that.
Really interesting term. You say independent.
Yeah.
Now, usually at a paper, the publisher will call down and say, we are endorsing George Bush. We are endorsing Cory Gardner. We're endorsing this. And the editorial editor and the board go, yes, sir. Is that still the case?
So, no, that is not the case. That is the case at some papers. I will say that they have
most papers that are owned by
they have a strong
publisher.
Right. Who is very active in the editorial board. I'll tell you, when Mac...
It's one of the pleasures of owning a paper
is the editorial voice.
You get to do it.
When Mac Tolley was publisher, he took a very hands-off approach. He was one of the votes on the board, and no more and no less. And that, to me, was just incredibly refreshing. I have so much respect for Mac Tolley and his approach to the job as publisher. And today, there is no publisher at the Denver Post. Instead, on the board, we have some of our vice presidents and the editor of the paper, myself, and
they have a custodian on there. You got the guy who mows the front lawn.
And the six of us are each equal votes, and we sit in the room and we try and make these determinations based on what we think is the best for our community. These are all longtime Denver metro area residents who care about the community.
Those are the worst type of people to listen to. You need ideologues like me. You don't care about the community. When you write the editorial, do you know that you're making pull quotes for advertisements? The Denver Post says he's a criminal and needs to be shot. You know that. I mean, when you're there on the typing it, do you see Denver Post says?
Yeah.
And I hope they pull this one.
I have perhaps never been as acutely aware of that as I've been made this election cycle, when I feel like the attack ads have been just. There's so many of them, so much money, so many ads. It feels like everything I write, something's getting pulled, and I see it on TV, and it's very strange.
Is it cool? I mean, I would love that. To see people putting money behind some stupid thing I wrote, and it's up there on the TV screen. Honey, I wrote that. That was me.
I like it when it's done fairly. It makes me feel a little sick to my stomach when they take what I've written out of context.
Like what?
Oh, I can't. Just decrying ads, or when they'll take one sentence out of broader context. Right. You know, where I've written about an issue and I've tried to put it into perspective about how big of a deal it is, and they take the one sentence that makes it look like it's a really big deal. And I'm like, well, it was a pretty measured editorial.
30-second ads are not known for nuance.
I know.
Right.
So,
well, let's go through some of the choices. Let's start off with the top. Why Jared Polis? I mean, I'm not surprised because, well, you are a communist and running a communist page, but why a socialist like him?
I think for me, his vision for the state was really compelling. He came in, he knew what he wanted to accomplish as governor. He knew how he wanted to get there.
All kidding aside,
yeah.
Was there a preordained? I mean, was this board truly open to both Walker and Jared? I mean, both of them are good guys. I know them both. So, I mean, the Post has not been known for its conservative picks usually.
Yeah. So we were truly open to what these candidates had to say, and I think that the board, more than anything, was committed to focusing on policy for that race, that we wanted to see somebody who would get in and support the kind of policies that we support for the state.
Tax increases.
Tax increases. You know, tax increases. No.
More free stuff.
Committed to finding a way to help our education system, which is struggling, was a big one for the board. For one of our members, one of the things for them they've been very passionate about has been some of the gun legislation, and not seeing that rolled back that was passed in 2013. Those types of issues. We tried to focus on policy and less so on personality and on some of the gotcha politics. You don't buy it?
No, I think you just go, listen, we got to do all the Democrats, and then we got to come up with one Republican we can endorse, because that will help us look like not the hacks that we are. So
that's just not how the conversations happened. And
I'm sure that's not how the conversations happened.
The board was surprised when you look at how everything came down, at the number of Republicans that we ended up endorsing. I think if you would, in a Trump year, if you had sat down our members of the board individually and said, how do you predict the board's going to stand? I think that we all would have thought, you know, we might not be center-right this year. We might be a little more left-leaning. But then as individual candidates came in, it's just the way it fell when we looked at policy and
going down the list of the four ones.
Yep.
So Polis for governor.
Polis for governor.
AG.
George Brockler, who's a Republican.
Why that?
Why George Brockler?
Yeah, because when you look at policy, you're looking at Weiser, who is an anti-gun nut in line with your board, a social justice warrior in line with your religion. Why not Weiser?
I think that George Brockler really impressed us with his dedication to the rule of law. I know for me personally, I had a lot of respect for the way that Attorney General Jon Caldara approached the job, and I heard a lot of the things that Brockler said echoed in that vein of, I might disagree with this statute, but it is a statute on the books, and I'm going to defend it to the best of my ability. You know, when Jon Caldara was the Attorney General and the gun laws were challenged, his office put on the defense of that legislation, and they won. And sitting in that courtroom, it was an impressive legal defense.
treasurer.
Treasurer was Wayne Williams, the incumbent, who I think is doing.
No, he's not the treasurer.
Or, oh, sorry, Treasurer,
Yeah,
Secretary of State. I'm glad you're here, keeping me honest. Secretary of State Wayne Williams, who's the incumbent and is doing a great job.
I don't know. I don't know of anybody who can't endorse Wayne Williams, because it is largely a functionary role of making sure elections are done well, making sure that the records are kept, that rules are followed. It is, you either do the job or you don't do the job, and I don't know of anyone who has done it better than Wayne.
Yeah,
Would you agree?
Yeah, I think he's doing a great job in that role.
It's one of the areas where it's safe to vote for a Republican or even endorse a Republican, because they really can't do much in policy.
Yeah, rulemaking, they could do some things. You know, if you had somebody in that office who was very committed to making it more difficult for people to vote because they thought it might help their party, or wanted to open up the floodgates in ways that you know, injured the reliability of the elections, you could have somebody through rulemaking that ran amok, but
Treasurer. Now, treasurer is different than
Dave,
Secretary
yes,
of State.
It is, thank you. We endorsed Dave Young, who's a
Why?
Democrat. You know, he was on the Joint Budget Committee, and we felt like he just had a really good grasp on how the state runs, how the budget runs, and could oversee that office well.
But you understand, you know, AG stands for aspiring governor, and treasurer in this state is really the aspiring governor,
It's
it
true.
seems. Romer was, I believe. Owens was. Of course, Walker is. So when you give that treasurer seat, you're just, you know, it's a backup quarterback position.
Is that what happens? I thought that the lieutenant governor would take over if the governor.
It never seems that way.
Okay.
Let's go to the initiatives, and I
Yeah.
think the one that sticks out is 112. And you guys were pretty strongly against 112, the fracking ban. And you were one of the few places that actually called it a fracking ban, which is fascinating for me, because 4 years ago, when Polis was putting this up, it was called a fracking ban. Now the vernacular has changed to a setback, which is so much more warmer and fuzzier. Why did you call it a fracking ban?
Well, if you look at the language of what would be put into statute, it's not just a setback from homes for safety reasons. It's a setback from waterways. It's a setback from other sensitive areas. And when you look at the map of what radiuses that would impact, it's effectively a ban, particularly in the Wattenberg field where all of the hydraulic fracturing is occurring. So it's a ban.
It's a ban.
It's a ban. And so the one, there might be, if it does pass, it is in statute. It's not constitutional. So hopefully lawmakers would roll it back, right? They would say, well, the people have spoken and said we want a setback from houses, but we're going to take away all of these sensitive areas and make it less of a ban and more about safety and health. It's possible.
It's possible.
It's possible.
You just keep on thinking that.
Okay.
Let's go to the taxes. 73. What did you guys do on this one? This would change our tax structure, and I know you don't think there's ever enough money going to education.
Never enough.
No, you would open up other people's wrists and bleed out to fund more of education. Where were you guys?
We opposed 73.
That must have been, actually, knowing you, that must have been a tough one for you.
It was a tough one for me. Yep. I think that our schools do need more money, particularly our rural school districts, our school districts on the western slope, school districts that have failed to pass mill levy overrides. They are hurting financially, and the people who are suffering as a result of that are the students. And yet we still oppose 73. I think that it was the size of the tax, the 1.6 billion, and then the way that it would be administered inside the Constitution.
Not knowing what you were going to get as well. We didn't know exactly where all this money was going to go.
Yeah. So it rejiggered the formula in it, but.
So you cared about taxes there, but when it comes to screwing poor people with a sales tax increase, you were okay with 110, which, by the way, has no chance of winning.
That's what you keep telling me, John. You keep telling me it has no chance of winning.
If I will give you odds.
Odds, okay.
I tell you what. If it wins, I will do a column on what a wonderful editor, imperial editor you are.
Okay.
If it loses, I get to write a column that you cannot censor.
John, I don't censor your column.
That you cannot edit.
Okay.
Yes,
deal.
you censor my
I can't edit it. I will.
Only for grammar.
That sounds like a deal.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, we're on that.
You were on. Okay.
Oh, it's going to be glorious. Why did, real fast, we're running out of time. Why a sales tax increase for transportation? Or in projects that you admittedly don't know?
I think that sales tax for transportation projects makes sense. It is regressive, but it also is similar to a gas tax in the sense of that it's being charged to people who come from out of state, who use our roadways and buy things.
There's nothing like a gas tax. People who use the roads pay gas tax. People who buy their milk pay sales tax, and only a small percentage of them are out of state.
Except milk is exempt. But yes, I get what you're saying.
Shoes for Junior who wants to go to the classes.
And I think if we had a dedicated revenue stream for transportation, it would free up general fund dollars for other things like education.
Why is it that the Trans Initiative 20 years ago was not risky, but this year, 109 mine is too risky?
So I think that if you look at the increasing revenue in the state and you pull a certain amount of that out for roads, it means that education and higher education, other state services like the Department of Human Services wouldn't get an equal share of that.
Even though the budget is 3 times the size, and what was different 20 years ago when you guys endorsed something when there was less money, excess money coming into the state?
I think that just the pressures on the budget have been such, and I'll be the first to admit that a big part of the pressure on the budget is coming from Medicare and the growth.
So should we have a tax increase for Medicare? Would that be a wiser thing to do?
Well, that would be one way to help the state with its budget problems.
Last question, real fast. I'm so late. When will you fire me?
Soon, John.
Good. Because I'm surprised it's lasted this long. Megan, thank you. Always a pleasure. Stay tuned.